back, everyone. We're continuing to look at the Korg DW-8000, and our next stop is the part of the synth that I think is probably the most analog sounding, which is the filter of the synthesizer. So far we've talked about the oscillators, we've talked about the volume or the amplification envelope. On this video we're going to talk about the filter that comes on the DW-8000, as well as the envelope you can use to control the filter. Now, if you're into synthesizers at all, you probably like doing something like this, which is controlling the filter. Essentially what a filter does is the entire audio spectrum that a synthesizer puts out, the filter, through the use of the cutoff control, will change what frequencies come through. Different synthesizers have different kinds of filters, but on the Korg DW-8000, its filter is what's known as a low-pass filter. It is all analog, so it's got that kind of analog warmth to it. And what it essentially does is, when it's at full value here, all the entire frequency spectrum for the sound comes through, but as you roll the cutoff back, it starts allowing less and less of the high frequencies to come through, allowing only the lower frequencies to come through. So here's what that sounds like. So it just controls the timbre or the sound of the synthesizer, not the pitch, not the volume, but just the sound or the feel of it. Now, next you've got the resonance knob, which basically controls if the cutoff limits how much of the spectrum is coming through. Resonance essentially boosts the power of that spectrum or the level of that spectrum. So here's what that sounds like. When it's at nothing, I roll the cutoff back. It's essentially just like I'm taking sound away, right? But as I boost the resonance, you can hear how the rest it's boosts in an interesting way. You can get interesting, kind of more extreme sounds out of it. The resonance on this thing, I have to say, is it's a very resonant filter. You can get really resonant sounds out of it. In fact, one thing that I wanted to show you was the keyboard tracking. Essentially what this does is, keyboard, normally if you've got filters set a certain way, let's turn the filter down some. I filtered out a lot of the higher frequencies, so it's a pretty dark sound. Here's the lowered keys, here's the higher keys. And let's turn this down so you can hear that better. So you can hear the lower keys are filtered, similar to how the higher keys are filtered. As I turn the keyboard tracking up to a quarter, the higher notes are a little bit brighter. If I turn up all the way, the higher keys are much brighter than the lower keys. Basically what this is doing is, the higher the level of the keyboard tracking, the more that the filter will essentially open and more high frequencies can get through, the higher up the keyboard you go. So the idea here, I believe, is that lower sounds sound darker, higher sounds sound brighter, and it gives you kind of more dynamic control over the feel of the sound. This comes in handy too when we're playing around with a secondary function of the filter, which is, you can actually, this thing is so resonant that it does go into what's known as self-oscillation, which means it essentially produces its own sound. So far the thing that has been running the sound has been these two oscillators up here, but if I turn down their levels, I can actually use the filter and really really what I'm doing is I'm playing the filter. Gives it a different kind of sound. You can get really unique things out of this. You can also mix in the oscillators again for some more extreme sounds. Maybe mix some noise in. And you can just get kind of goofy stuff going on. But one thing I did want to point out is keyboard tracking. Beyond just opening up the filter, the higher you go up the keyboard, it sort of ties the keyboard to the filter, so that when I'm playing keys, the filter snaps to whatever pitch I'm putting through. If I turn keyboard tracking off, it doesn't really do that anymore. I mean, as I turn up some, it starts snapping more, but if I want to play the filter, I need to have the keyboard tracking to 1. Even if it's to 0, though, maybe you can make some percussive sounds, atonal things. Okay, now moving on. You'll notice, in addition to cutoff, actually now that I'm not self-oscillating, I have to have some oscillators coming through. Let's open up the filter some. Okay, now that we've looked at the cutoff, the resonance, playing the filter by making it self-oscillate, let's take a look at what's going on with this EG-INT knob. What this is doing is saying EG in the world of synthesizer stands for envelope generator. In the last video, we talked about the voltage-controlled amplifier envelope generator. When it says envelope generator intensity on this knob, it's referring to how much is the voltage control filter envelope generator affecting the cutoff of the filter. So there's a whole new envelope that's devoted solely to what's going on with the filter. So the higher I turn this knob up, the intensity for the EG intensity, the more the filter envelope is affecting the movement and sound of the filter. You've got 2 controls for this, plus and minus. We'll focus on plus right now. And this is polarity, plus and minus, which basically means they're kind of negatives of each other. So with polarity set to plus, the filter envelope controls how quickly and in what dynamic does the filter open, or the cutoff go from here to here, right? So if it's already down some, you can hear how the attack is affecting how fast does the filter open up. Other things work just like with the amplification envelope. All these same things work the same with the filter envelope. The decay, the breakpoint, slope, sustain. I can get unique sort of movement using breakpoint slope. Just like with velocity sensitivity on the amplification envelope, I have velocity sensitivity on the filter envelope. So the harder once turned up, or the harder I press the key, the faster the envelope opens. So yeah, more dynamic control in that way. Again, using breakpoint and slope makes it kind of more unique. But let's see how it sounds with negative polarity. I'm hitting keys, but nothing's happening. Why is that? Well, because with positive polarity, again, positive moves from nothing on the cutoff wheel to higher on the cutoff wheel, moving up, moving positive. Polarity set to negative means that it's moving from open or high on the cutoff wheel to closed or low on the cutoff wheel. So let's turn it high. Now, instead of controlling how fast does the filter open, with polarity set to negative, the filter envelope controls how fast does the filter close. And again, just like what I mentioned before, all these other knobs apply, so I can mess with the breakpoint, the slope, all kinds of stuff. I would encourage you to play around with this. You can get some unexpected results from messing around with these knobs and controlling how and when and what method the filter opens. And I'm going to gush again about breakpoint and slope. It's so cool to have these knobs here because just as from a creative standpoint, we saw in the last video how it allows for volume changes up and down as time moves on. This allows for cutoff changes up and down as time moves on, which is pretty nice. I do want to point out one thing that is, I guess you could say, kind of a weakness of this synthesizer, which is the filter sweep. If you look at reviews on YouTube of people kind of comparing or contrasting different analog synthesizers, one thing that they talk a lot about is how smooth is the cutoff. Meaning, a lot of analog synthesizers have digital controls. The knobs that you're moving are not actual electronic potentiometers, but they are digital kind of knobs that are sending digital messages to an analog circuit, which is what the Korg DW-8000 does. What's interesting with the Korg DW-8000 is there seems to be kind of a idiosyncratic method as to, for each knob, how many value points do I have. So for example, filter, or I should say the amplification envelope and the filter envelope, I have maybe 31 values. For cutoff, I have 63 values. For resonance, I have 31. Why is it such, that many values for each knob? I don't know. That's just how they made it. But what that means ultimately is when I have my resonance cranked all the way up and I want to do a filter sweep, it does have a kind of zippery effect. There's only so many values that the cutoff can be applied to as you move the knob. So as you go through all the values, you do hear that sort of zipper effect from one value to the next. That's just part of this synthesizer. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I mean, it's up to you to decide. But you're not going to get the super smooth, buttery filters that you might get from a true through and through, vintage analog synthesizer. But you can do some things with this to sort of try to make it smoother. For example, again, if we have polarity set to positive and cutoff is opening up, attack going all the way up makes it open up very slowly. Polarity set to down or negative, and let's turn our cutoff up. Attack set all the way up. Makes the filter sweep a lot smoother. So it's all about playing around with the limitations you have, right? I think from the engineer's point of view, when they made this synth, they were making a marriage of analog and digital, and all the controls had to be digital controls because of the way this architecture worked. Could they have put more values on the cutoff knob? Maybe, but we can still get smooth filter sweeps by simply just messing around with the envelope. So mess around, get creative. There's a lot of things to explore with this, but that's just the building blocks of how to affect the filter. Moving on, we're going to talk more about what else we can do to affect the filter, affect the pitch, maybe get into some more interesting ways to make more dynamic sounds. So thanks again, and stay tuned for the next video.